let's talk about properties. Properties are great. They allow you to give a public access to your fields while you establish your fields as private. Very nice to be able to work like that, because you're not actually giving your access to your underlying data. You're giving a point that the person or program that's using your class can actually come in and work with those values. And you can also set ranges, work within the confines of a particular constraint that you want to place on your variables. You're going to be getting and setting your properties. So you could go and create a whole method that's going to allow you to get into the data there, or you can allow that data to be accessed via public ways. Well, that's not really the best way to do that, because it's not reliable that way. When you're actually giving anybody access to these publicly, for the most part, it just means that you're not writing a very secure application, you're not writing a very secure class, and it's just not the way to do things. So you want to set things up. There's many reasons why it's bad, but it's just the way you want to set things up. So a property is anything that you can access via the main area, wherever you're going to work with that class, similar to working with, as we did with the C1.I, where we actually work with the actual field, but a property is going to, for example, these are properties. You're going to give access to it in the same way. You can type C1 dot, and then you're going to see that this is what a property is. Hand-picking something, that's a property. And if you're working with Visual Basic and you're working with C# or C++ and all the other languages, when you're working within your Visual Studio, for example, you set properties all the time. So properties are always used. So it's very easy to do that. So we'll set it up. Notice I have a capital X and capital Y that's going to set those values. This is a case-sensitive language, of course, so this is going to force us to stay within that case sensitivity, so we can have our variables as lowercase and then put our properties as uppercase. That's one way to do it, or you can just establish new variables altogether. But uppercase and lowercase will serve you well. Make your properties public so people or classes, other things can access it, and then you give the same type as your underlying data, your underlying fields. You don't have to, but you do have to explicitly convert that value. Or you can implicitly convert it as well. But you have to convert it if you have a different type there, and that doesn't make too much sense, of course. But it could, if you really want to narrow things down. You can bring in, say if you want to have things within a short value, for example, and you want to bring in a certain value that's going to fit within short, well, if you make your properties a little bit bigger that it can bring in other data, you don't have to necessarily trap with exception handling. You don't have to do that necessarily, as you could do this within the logic. So you can trap for that and work to transfer this to a short once you know and understand what the value is. Just one way you could do it, but really you should make them the same. Just giving you an argument if you don't want to, or you know that the language can actually extend itself to do that. So then all we do is we use get and set, and you can see the strange structure. This looks like a method. It's similar to a method. You have your open and close brackets, and within that you have get, and then open and close brackets, and then set, open and close brackets. So the details here within the get is easy enough. You're going to return the value that you're getting passed here, x. So this is the value that we want to actually pass back to the class or whoever is using that class, and you can see that that's what we specify here. Very easy. The variable that you're connecting x, capital X to, which is lowercase x, when somebody wants to get that information, you're going to provide it via the return. Very simple. You could do other things as well, but for the most part, that's what you're doing. Then you're going to set, and set is going to allow you to set the value. Now, value is the particular keyword that you're going to use to get the value of what the person is trying to set. So whoever is calling that class and specifying that here, where they're trying to change the value, here we're trying to change the value. We're doing a set. We're not doing a get. A get would be something like x is equal to c1.x. That's getting. We're getting the value into x. Here we're setting the value of capital X. So we slide back up, and you can see that the value is what is going to get that value. That's going to get the value. It's kind of a different way to see things. If you look at a method, for example, that would be like grabbing the passed variable that's passed as a parameter, but it's sort of invisible so you don't see it. No big deal. So anyway, here we are testing the value to see if it fits within a certain range. This is one test we can do. We also want to do exception handling, of course, and have a robust error protection, error checking routines, but that, for the most part, is just a routine checking the value, seeing if it fits our description, and then it's going to set a value. If this didn't fit within a range, we could set up an error routine within our class that the user would have to check for errors based on an error property that could be Boolean, for example, an error field. And if that error field ever becomes false or true, whatever you want, then that didn't actually successfully set that property. But it doesn't have to be that elaborate. You can make it simpler, set up the properties, allow the person to set up the properties, and then they have an execute method or something like that that says execute. And when you execute, then they have to test for errors. And during that error process, if there was an error or more than one error or more than 0 errors, then the person is actually going to have to work on those errors and figure out why. You could pass back an error message. You could pass back an error number. So different ways you could work with properties. But they're great to use this. Very great and excellent ways to work within C#. I recommend you use properties as much as possible.